Hi, this is Vantage Point, and we are recording from the Asia Pacific Roundtable 2030 happening at KL Hilton. And for this episode, we are like to talk about Indonesia. Indonesia is the largest economy in this region and is one of the emerging markets in the world. So we want to talk about the rise of Indonesia, what it means to our neighbors, and also ASEAN as a whole moving forward. How can we play a more central role on the global stage? And joining me today is Dr. Rizal Sukma, Executive Director of the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Indonesia. Thank you, Dr. Rizal, for coming on the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin with the ASEAN agenda. We are about 2.5 years away from our target of building an ASEAN community in 2015. Can you just walk us through like how far have we achieved and what is needed to achieve that target in 2015?
Okay, let me begin by saying that the regional community building, the ASEAN community building, will not stop, by the end of 2015, right? Because, the dates of the December 2015 is basically only the indications of the many steps that ASEAN has to go through in order to really create and transform itself into the regional community. So that's why I think we'll go beyond 2015. And in fact, there has been a lot of discussion so far on ASEAN post 2015, which of course will continue also the works that has not been completed within the first time frame until 2015 in the ASEAN community building blueprint. But if you look at the three pillars, the economic pillars and the political and security pillars, and also the social cultural pillars, and I think there is a gap in these three pillars with regard to like how much that we have achieved and how much we have implemented. And I think the economic pillars has achieved a lot. One study, the scorecard study that's been done by the ASEAN Secretariat, basically suggests that around like 77% of all the items or all the action lines has been implemented, and still I think we need to work on the remaining 23%. Right. But the political security pillars and also the social cultural pillars, I think are a bit difficult, to have a scorecard, on, because many items or many action lines in these two pillars is actually more in terms of like qualitative, in nature. So you can't say like 50% has been achieved or 60% has been achieved. But of course, it all contribute, to the transformation of ASEAN itself, into a regional community. And I think more works will still be needed, with the political security and also on the social cultural pillars, beyond 2015.
I believe you're talking about people to people and also a closer integration of the idea of ASEAN agenda itself among the people. Because if you take a look right now, Indonesia seems to be the leading in terms of pushing the ASEAN agenda forward. I believe it's one of the central agenda in your foreign policy as well. But my question to you is, does Indonesia want to take the lead? Because we are looking at Indonesia as the biggest economy in this region as somewhat of a big brother in terms of capacity, human capital, human resources, and in the sheer magnitude of size itself, it's telling that Indonesia will be one of the emerging markets.
I think within the ASEAN context, the collective leadership, has always been, the cardinal principle, and also I think the main principle on which ASEAN has been working, more than 4 decades. And in that context, I don't think that any single member, will be able to take the lead on all sectors, in the ASEAN context. So that's why I think I prefer to use the words, a champion, within ASEAN family with regard to a certain sector, a certain aspect on which each member state probably has or will or is in a better position to champion a certain agenda. And we know that countries like Malaysia, Singapore, of course, will be better positions to take the lead or champion certain lines in the economic cooperation, so that we can have the real ASEAN economic community in the future. And then throughout the history of ASEAN existence, Indonesia has been very active in trying to provide some ideas and also try to champion certain agendas, within the ASEAN political and security community
What
pillars.
does Indonesia bring to the table in the ASEAN agenda?
More in terms of the implementation of the ASEAN political and security blueprint, the community ASEAN political and security community blueprint, because if you recall. Back in 2003, it was Indonesia the one who actually proposed that in addition to being the ASEAN economic community, ASEAN should also transform itself into the ASEAN security community, because the economic achievement cannot be sustained unless you also have a very deep and a very solid political and security cooperations among the ASEAN member states. And then Philippines also thought that, look, don't forget about the people's component. So that's why Philippines came up with the idea in 2003 in the Bali summit with the ASEAN social and cultural pillars. So that's why now we have these 3 pillars. And in fact, I do believe that if we really want to have a truly regional community, and in fact, the social and cultural pillars is the most important one, because it can create greater understanding, more interaction among the people. This will seal the mutual understanding, and also will define the regional identity that we want to have in the future, rather than state-to-state cooperations only, because at the end it's the people, and the people has been the focus of the 3rd pillars, the social, cultural, community pillars.
I had the opportunity to attend Martin Natalegawa's speech earlier. He talked about 3 challenges that ASEAN is still facing right now, which is, you touched a bit about it, trust issues, territorial disputes, and also managing change within the growing ASEAN countries in this region. If I may just go to one of it first, which is trust issues. We have issues like South China Sea, in our backyard. Malaysia, we have our Sulu Sabah issue, Southern Thailand issue. Indonesia, you have pockets of violence as well. Trust issues. How do you create a common ground to move forward? Because currently there is still somewhat lacking.
Yeah, because when you talk about how you create trust, that also relates with the extent to which each country able to assess all the information available in other countries. Through that process, then I think the understanding of a certain policies, of certain developments in each other country can be better understood. My worry is that if the relationship between countries only conducted by government officials or bureaucrats, then we are not going to be very far from our attempt to create actually trust or to engage in the trust building, because at the end media will try to reflect the public's opinions or populist opinions in each country. So that's why like in the case of Indonesia, Malaysia, I'm not really worried about all the problems that we have, because the 2 countries interact to such a degree that we go beyond state to state. We go beyond foreign for the officials at the foreign ministry. Media also, I think they have very deep interaction, not to mention that the cross borders interaction among the people. So it's easy actually to understand a certain say policies, or easy to understand the motivation behind some of the movement that both sides and actually want to initiate. When Minister Mati talked about the trust deficit, I think he talks more in terms of the wider regions, within the Asia Pacific. For example, we aware about the trust deficit between China and Japan, and also between, I think, China and India, and Japan and South Korea, and so on. I'm not saying that we don't have that problem in Southeast Asia, but I think if you compare the trust deficit in Southeast Asia and in Northeast Asia, I think we should be proud of the ASEAN achievement so far, in which I think we in Southeast Asia are in the position now, if we are a bit suspicious of something, we can actually raise it in a very frank and a very a direct way, and then we have a discussion about it.
All right, I need to go for the first commercial break, but I'd like to talk more about Malaysia and Indonesia's relationship, because we have shared, we share culture, we share history, but at the same time, along the way, our paths have diverged, and then we are looking at changes within your country, my country, and also within this region, and what is the reading like, especially with Indonesia presidential election coming up. We'll get to that with Dr. Rizal Sukma after the break. Stay with us. Hi, you're still on Vantage Point, and I'm speaking with Dr. Rizal Sukma, Executive Director for the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Indonesia. So I'd like to talk a bit about relationship between Indonesia and Malaysia. I mean, you were talking about media and portrayal, perception of people to people. Just trying to understand from Indonesia's perspective, what do they think about Malaysia and how can you improve this relationship people to people? Because government to government, I think it's pretty much healthy and good, as reiterated by both our governments, but people to people wise.
If you look at Indonesia-Malaysia relation as a whole, right, this is in India as a republic, there are only three problems that I think we need to work on. Number one, on the migrant workers, all right? Number two, on the territorial disputes. Number three, on this, probably not disputes, but differences in the way we look at the cultural, heritage, right? Only the three issues. But I think the most difficult one is number one, because it's number one that then, basically affect the way the people in Indonesia look at the second problem and the third problem. So, we need to manage this problem, in order to actually, change the way public, on both sides, basically look at, each other, because of course, there is a certain, dominant image of each other, which, we need to work on. So this is going to be a long-term project, but in order to actually address this misperceptions or the tendency to stereotyping, and so on, we need also to address, the core issues that give rise, to that kind of the misperceptions, on both sides. So I think the government and also the civil society and including media are working, in order to, I think, address these three core problems, in our bilateral relations, so that, we together can also address the problem of this stereotyping and also the public, perceptions of each other. Now, unless, we do this at the same time, I don't think that we'll go very far, in order to change the public, perceptions, especially in Indonesia, because, I can't recall how many media that we have, at national level itself, probably like 30 or 40 completely free and independent media, not to mention also the local medias in each of the province. And then I don't believe that all the media is actually interest-free, right? So, within the democratic context like Indonesia, some medias are bound, to present certain, certain interests. Some media are bound to actually be used in order to advance, probably narrow and also short-term political interests of whoever actually wants to.
The reason I'm asking that because some way or another it does shape the foreign policy of Indonesia, because
it's depend, on which group that actually articulate, their public views, because I think the people at the foreign ministry and also in Indonesia's government as a whole also understand, which view that really represent a large, segments of Indonesia's society, which view that only, basically represent a very narrow, narrowly defined, interest. I think they do understand. So I think the response, to the public opinions in Indonesia's foreign policy making really depend on our own understanding about, whose view is important, whose view is, basically not very important.
Okay, we were talking earlier about our workers, migrant workers, which brings to the topic of development. Indonesia is growing rapidly, but at the same time, we also see that domestically, Indonesia still has, every country has their own problem. But I would just like your input about where is Indonesia getting at some of the issues like corruption, job opportunities, perhaps a wider income gap between the have and the have-not. So your thoughts on that?
I think it's quite normal, because we only recently managed to recover from the serious, economic crisis of 1998, which was, of course, followed by, severe, political crisis at that time. And within the 10 years, time span, what we have achieved and where we are now, I think, really need to be appreciated by Indonesians, themselves. It's not easy, to bring back the country as large and as diverse of Indonesia from the brinks of collapse back in 1998 to where we are now. And I think over the last 5 years, the development there really provides, some kind of, a new optimism on the part of many people that, at the end, no matter how chaotic Indonesia's politics, looks like, but it has not actually hampered, the development and the economic progress, as a whole. So we see this trend that, the politician can basically do the political bickering, even they fight among themselves, in severe competitive, domestic politics, but that's no longer actually, undermine or even destroy, the economic development. That's, I think, one interesting outcome of the process of learning and also the process of transition that we've gone through from 1998 to 2004. So from 2004, things began to pick up, pick up again. Yes, corruption is, I think, a major, challenge. In addition to other issues such as the communal violence, the weak law enforcement, and so on, which of course require a lot of work, in the future. The fact that now the anti-corruption commissions become one of the most feared public institutions, I think also tell us something about, the light at the end of the tunnel. So at least there is still an institutions that work tirelessly, in order to address this, a serious problem that that we face. So hopefully, as our democracy consolidates, further, and as a political parties, begin to find a way, to function without the need to resort to the state fund, then hopefully the efforts to address these corruptions, can pay off.
Okay, and Indonesia's presidential election is coming up very soon. I'd like to get your insights on that, but I'll have to take this discussion to the last commercial break. We'll be back very shortly. Stay with us. Hi, you're still on Vantage Point. I'm speaking with Dr. Rizal Sukma. Back to the point you raised in our first segment about ASEAN moving forward and finding common ground and also recognizing common threats. Perhaps we could look at it as each of our countries have different problems, but common threats such as non-traditional threats such as trans-border crime, natural disasters, and diseases. These are some of the things that we can work together upon, and that's how I see maybe when you're talking about people-to-people moving forward, these are the areas we could work on.
I think these issues of common concern, have been there, all the time. And then, in fact, I think ASEAN has been very good, in cooperating in order to address those so-called non-traditional security issues. But, beyond 2015, I think the most serious challenge that we face is actually how ASEAN countries together can ensure the strategic autonomy of Southeast Asia in the face of, growing rivalry between great powers or among great powers.
How do you envision ASEAN on the global stage in moving forward?
First, we have to maintain that, centrality, within the East Asia, context, because without, the ASEAN's, centrality, then ASEAN will be divided, because we all know that now we are talking about the power shift at the global level, and then the prospect for US-China rivalry and competition at the global level. So, and most of those, I think competitions, will take place, in East Asia, on which I think Southeast Asia is part of it. So that's why I think the biggest challenge that we face is how to position ourselves within that emerging rivalry between US and China at the global level. And that's require one ASEAN's, unity. And then if we can get united, then, we can actually, maintain that centrality in order to ensure that Southeast Asia will never be the theater for major powers.
Beyond geopolitics, centrality of ASEAN in economy, perhaps I'm taking an example of Europe. Of course, we have to learn from the mistakes of Europe, but do you see ASEAN could actually move towards that in terms of our economical standing? In
terms of the economy, I think as always, it has always been the ASEAN principle that, we subscribe to the open regionalism, in that sense that, we from the very beginning realized that, you can't actually maintain this economic development on your own, even though, you combine the 10, countries' potential at the same time. So that's why, we have a lot of these cooperations with our dialogue partners. I think the most important one is the ASEAN +3, in which we also work very closely with China, Japan, and South Korea. So within that context, I think ASEAN can only go beyond being a market of 600 million people. If we continue also to consolidate our relationship, with these major economic players, not only within the East Asia, but also, of course, beyond with the EU and also with the US. That I think where ASEAN, should move and position itself.
Okay. My last question would be on the presidential election 2014. Some of the names have been announced. Golkar is going with Abu Rizal. Megawati Soekarno Putri has said she is giving way to Pak Jokowi, Governor of Jakarta, and we have some younger faces as well. I have been reading a bit of Indonesia, and I see that a lot of young people want new faces and a new sort of thinking, new sort of mechanism. Your thoughts about that, and what are your insights?
Number one, I think we should try to use, or should try to make 2014 as the beginning, of the emergence of the new generations of leadership in Indonesia. And Indonesia's politics is still very fluid. 2 months ago, we believed that, these new faces impossible, all right? But, as of 3 weeks ago, and then suddenly we realized that's possible. CSIS, my institute, actually conducted a survey, and then, we found that one, like you just mentioned, that actually majority of Indonesians, want to see new faces, new candidates, new potential leaders. And then, the fact that the current governor of Jakarta suddenly, become, the top choice among the respondents, I think is also quite important development. So, in that context, I can understand why President Yudhoyono within his own party, tried to also have the convention in order to, look for new potential candidates. And I think the Trade Minister, Gita Wirjawan, and also Pak Mahfud MD, the former, chairman of the Constitutional Court, have been mentioned under the potential new faces that can actually compete in the 2014. So
your personal prediction?
It's still hard, because the election is still, almost 2 years.
At the time of recording, perhaps what do you think are the criteria that Indonesians want from the next president?
No, I think the public knows is actually getting tired with the old type of, leadership, who actually present, himself as a, bureaucrat, very aloof, and try to keep distance, with the public. Now, people are looking for somebody, that can be considered, yes, he or she is one of us. And I think, more and more people, find that in the persons of Jokowi, the current governor, who actually doesn't really, follow, strict protocols, and so on. So he actually tries to
more people-oriented.
Exactly, who actually can, be more sympathetic, to the common people's, suffering, and also somebody who can show to the people that, he's really trying to resolve, the problem. And never mind, whether the person can resolve it at the end, but, what we are still looking for now is somebody who really genuinely, really try and wants to resolve the problems, at hand. That's a good start, that the first quality that I think the people is looking for. Number two, and also decisiveness, because, in the countries as diverse as Indonesia and also as chaotic as Indonesia, directions, even though we are now a democracy, but clear direction from the leader is still needed, Otherwise, the cabinet will go all over the place. That, cannot be allowed anymore, beyond imposed, 2014.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Rizal, for your insights. And thank you for watching Vantage Point. And if you have any comments, please drop us a line at my email, cynthia_ng@astro.com.my, or you can get us on you can find us on Facebook, Twitter. And that's all for this episode. Thank you to KL Hilton and to ISIS Malaysia for organizing this event. I'll see you again on the next episode of Vantage Point. Thank you and goodbye. Thank you, Dr. Rizal.